Now, I want you to pause for a moment and really think. You see, most people walk through life reacting, never reflecting. But reflection is power, and if we reflect deeply enough, even in chaos, we can find clarity. In the realm of geopolitics, perception often carries more weight than reality. Governments, media outlets, and global institutions shape public opinion by projecting certain narratives, which may not always align with the actual facts on the ground. When we ask why America appears to support Pakistan against India, the first thing we must recognize is that what we see is not always what is. The perception of support, of alignment, or of favoritism is frequently cultivated intentionally for strategic, psychological, or diplomatic reasons. America, like any other global superpower, operates on layers of interests. These interests are not confined to public opinion or moral obligations. They are based on influence, regional stability, economic partnerships, and military strategy. When it seems like the United States is openly backing Pakistan, it is crucial to examine whether this is a full-spectrum truth or a carefully managed image designed for a particular audience. Perception can be weaponized. It can create fear, provoke reaction, and influence decisions at the highest levels. Many decisions in international diplomacy are made behind closed doors. What is shown to the world, the photo ops, the press conferences, the headlines, is often a distraction from the deeper game being played. The American government's approach toward Pakistan may be rooted in Cold War-era alliances, counterterrorism cooperation, and strategic positioning in South Asia. But these motivations are rarely presented openly. Instead, what filters down to the general public is a constructed narrative, selective meetings, aid packages, and diplomatic statements that give the impression of bias or favoritism. India, with its rising economic power and global influence, is often portrayed as self-reliant and assertive on the world stage. This perception, while largely accurate, also plays into America's calculations. Supporting a nation that is perceived to already be strong does not carry the same weight, visibly or strategically, as appearing to support a nation seen as unstable or in need of guidance. The support for Pakistan, then, may be a move to maintain balance, to retain leverage, or to preserve a channel of influence in a volatile region. Furthermore, media plays a critical role in cementing perception. Western media houses have historically presented conflicts and alliances through a Western lens, often omitting key cultural, historical, or political nuances that shape the dynamics in regions like South Asia. A single statement by a U.S. official can be amplified or distorted depending on the editorial stance of the outlet reporting it. This leads to widespread beliefs that may not have much grounding in comprehensive geopolitical reality, but are widely accepted as truth due to repetition and visibility. The role of perception becomes even more significant when public reactions are shaped by emotional narratives rather than informed analysis. Citizens in both India and Pakistan often consume news that reinforces their biases. A diplomatic engagement with one country is seen as betrayal by another. But international relations do not function on a moral compass. They function on a matrix of power, strategy, and long-term interests. What appears to be support might actually be containment, negotiation leverage, or even a facade to maintain public order in sensitive areas. When we examine America's supposed support for Pakistan, it's essential to scrutinize the mechanisms through which that perception is built. Diplomatic optics, military aid headlines, or joint statements do not always reflect deeper alliances. These are tools used to maintain an image that serves the interests of multiple players involved. Reality in this realm is often hidden beneath layers of intentional ambiguity, and understanding that difference is the first step in seeing the geopolitical chessboard clearly. Strategic interests have always trumped ethical considerations in global politics. Nations do not engage in alliances or conflicts purely out of moral obligation. They do so to protect and advance their national interests. When we consider America's relationship with Pakistan, especially in contrast to India, we must examine the deeper strategic incentives that shape such foreign policies. The alignment is not necessarily about choosing sides between right and wrong, but about positioning for influence, access, and control in a highly volatile and strategically critical region. South Asia holds immense strategic importance for the United States, not only because of its proximity to the Middle East and Central Asia, but also due to its significance in global trade routes, military logistics, and nuclear dynamics. Pakistan has long been a key player in this equation, largely because of its geographic location, its role in the Muslim world, and its complex ties with Afghanistan and China. For decades, the United States has invested in maintaining a working relationship with Pakistan, not because of shared values or trust, but because Pakistan has served as a functional partner in achieving American objectives in the region. During the Cold War, Pakistan was a critical ally against Soviet expansion. Later, in the post-9/11 world, it became a logistical and intelligence partner in the so-called War on Terror. Despite Pakistan's double game, harboring terrorist elements while claiming to fight them, Washington continued to fund and engage with its military and intelligence networks. Why? Because from a strategic standpoint, it was more beneficial to have Pakistan inside the room than outside it. That strategic calculus has remained. Even as India has risen in global stature, America's continued engagement with Pakistan isn't a sign of support in the conventional sense. It is a reflection of long-term positioning. India, on the other hand, presents a different kind of challenge. It is a sovereign power with its own ambitions, one that is not easily influenced or swayed by outside pressures. While the U.S.-India relationship has grown, especially in trade, defense, and technology, India has shown independence in its foreign policy decisions, such as maintaining relations with Russia and resisting alignment with Western narratives and global conflicts. This independence limits the leverage that the U.S. can exert over India. In contrast, Pakistan's political and economic instability often makes it more malleable to foreign influence, especially when tied to military aid or financial support from institutions backed by the West. Moreover, maintaining relations with Pakistan allows the U.S. to monitor and potentially counterbalance China's growing influence in the region. Pakistan is a major beneficiary of China's Belt and Road Initiative, particularly through the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, CPEC. By keeping a foot in Pakistan, the U.S. positions itself to gather intelligence and exert some level of pressure or deterrence against Chinese expansionist ambitions. This strategic interest, once again, outweighs concerns about Pakistan's internal politics or its antagonistic stance toward India. Another layer to this is the role of defense and arms trade. Pakistan remains a major recipient of U.S. military equipment and aid. These transactions are not simply about arming an ally. They are about ensuring dependency and influence. By supplying military resources, the U.S. ensures continued engagement, data exchange, and diplomatic leverage. It is a calculated move that serves American defense contractors, intelligence operations, and broader foreign policy agendas. Ethical concerns about how those arms are used often take a back seat to the perceived strategic value of the relationship. Even when India faces security threats or border tensions with Pakistan, the United States typically issues neutral statements urging peace and dialogue. This neutrality is not necessarily a betrayal of democratic principles. It is a diplomatic strategy to avoid alienating either side. By maintaining ambiguity, the U.S. keeps both nations within reach, preserving its flexibility to act according to its own evolving interests. This balancing act is not driven by values, but by a desire to retain influence over two critical players in a strategically vital region. Economic and military leverage are the primary currencies of power in modern geopolitics. When a nation seeks to influence another, it does not rely solely on dialogue or diplomacy. It uses the tools of money, trade, and defense capabilities to create dependency, alignment, or compliance. The United States, as the dominant global superpower for much of the past century, has mastered the use of economic and military leverage to maintain its strategic interests across the world, including in South Asia. The perceived favoritism toward Pakistan over India in certain matters is not necessarily about friendship or alliance. It's about calculated leverage. Pakistan has for decades been one of the largest recipients of U.S. military and financial aid. This aid was never charity. It served multiple strategic purposes, from securing cooperation in Afghanistan to ensuring American military presence near the borders of Iran, China, and Central Asia. The billions of dollars funneled into Pakistan's military and government institutions over time have created a cycle of dependency. With this dependency comes leverage. The U.S. can use the threat of withholding funds, delaying military deliveries, or withdrawing diplomatic support to steer decisions within the Pakistani power structure. India, in contrast, is not dependent on such aid. It has built a more self-reliant economy, invested heavily in indigenous defense technologies, and pursued strategic autonomy in foreign policy. As a result, America's leverage over India is comparatively limited. While the two countries collaborate in defense, space, and trade, India is not beholden to U.S. interests. This independence, while admirable, also means that the U.S. cannot as easily exert influence when it comes to specific regional or global decisions. In the calculus of power, this makes Pakistan a more pliable partner, despite its internal instability or controversial actions. Military aid and arms sales are another form of leverage that the U.S. uses with surgical precision. By supplying weapons, training, and joint operations, the United States creates a long-term dependency. Defense ties are not just about hardware. They involve software integration, maintenance contracts, logistical cooperation, and intelligence sharing. These factors create institutional bonds that are difficult to break. For Pakistan, which lacks a strong indigenous defense industry, such support is critical. For the U.S., it ensures continued influence over Pakistan's military, which is arguably the most powerful institution in the country. Economic leverage extends beyond direct aid. It includes access to global financial systems, control over international institutions such as the IMF and World Bank, and influence over trade agreements. When Pakistan faces economic crises, as it often does, it turns to the IMF or seeks support from allied nations. The United States, as a dominant voice in these institutions, has the ability to shape loan conditions, timelines, and diplomatic backing. This form of soft control allows Washington to guide Pakistan's decisions without overt pressure, using economic survival as the underlying force. India, by contrast, has a more diversified economy and a wider range of trade partners. While it engages deeply with the U.S. market, it also maintains strong ties with Russia, the EU, and increasingly with Middle Eastern powers. This diversification reduces the effectiveness of American economic leverage. India can resist pressure on matters like oil imports from sanctioned nations or strategic deals with rival powers without suffering crippling consequences. For American policymakers, this limits their tools of persuasion and makes India less controllable in specific diplomatic contexts. The concept of leverage also plays out in regional dynamics. By supporting Pakistan in certain scenarios, the U.S. creates a counterweight to India's growing dominance in South Asia. This keeps the regional power balance in flux, allowing the U.S. to maintain a role as mediator, arms supplier, and strategic advisor. Leverage, in this case, is not only about what is given, it is about what is withheld. By playing both sides selectively, the U.S. ensures that neither becomes too powerful to ignore its influence. This calculated ambiguity is not rooted in fairness, but in strategic necessity. Media narratives play a powerful role in shaping public opinion, often serving as tools of manipulation rather than vehicles of truth. In geopolitical conflicts, the media rarely presents a neutral, balanced perspective. Instead, it selects, frames, and amplifies stories that align with the interests of those who control or influence its operations. When examining the perception that America openly supports Pakistan against India, it's critical to understand how media narratives are constructed, disseminated, and received by different audiences across the world. In the United States and other Western countries, mainstream media tends to reflect the priorities and biases of political elites and institutional power centers. These outlets often simplify complex issues to fit into digestible headlines and sound bites. Coverage of South Asian affairs, in particular, is typically filtered through limited cultural understanding, outdated stereotypes, or geopolitical objectives. As a result, Pakistan is sometimes portrayed as a victim of instability or terrorism, while India is portrayed as an assertive or nationalistic actor. This framing can skew public perception, especially among audiences that lack direct experience or deeper context. The choice of language used in headlines and reports can have a significant impact. Words like concern, support, or ally are not thrown around carelessly. They are strategically deployed. When the U.S. provides aid to Pakistan, media outlets might emphasize humanitarian or counterterrorism angles, portraying the relationship as necessary or even noble. Meanwhile, when India takes a strong stance on regional issues or security matters, the same outlets might frame it as aggressive or controversial. This subtle yet consistent bias reinforces certain ideas over time, leading to a perception of unequal treatment. International news agencies often rely on government briefings, press releases, or embedded journalists to report from conflict zones or diplomatic hotspots. These sources are not always independent or objective. Information is filtered, narratives are coordinated, and dissenting voices are marginalized. In cases where the U.S. wants to maintain a delicate balance between India and Pakistan, media coverage may be intentionally vague or misleading, creating the illusion of neutrality while quietly reinforcing one side's narrative. Social media platforms have further complicated this landscape. Algorithms reward sensationalism, outrage, and polarization. Misinformation spreads faster than truth, and echo chambers reinforce existing biases. Fake populism propaganda, anonymous influencers, and digital lobbying campaigns all contribute to a chaotic information environment where perception becomes reality. In this ecosystem, even small diplomatic gestures, such as a tweet from a U.S. official or a meeting with a Pakistani leader, can be amplified into symbols of allegiance, regardless of the broader context. Indian media, too, plays a role in shaping perception domestically. In response to global narratives, Indian outlets may overemphasize perceived slights or frame diplomatic developments as betrayals. This defensive posture is understandable in a nation that has long felt misrepresented on the world stage. However, it can also contribute to a cycle of mistrust, nationalism, and emotional rhetoric that overshadows strategic analysis. When domestic media frames every American move as anti-India, it reinforces public anger without offering deeper insight into the geopolitical logic at play. Meanwhile, Pakistani media often portrays American engagement as validation, using diplomatic visits or financial aid to bolster internal narratives of importance and partnership. This, too, feeds the perception that the U.S. sides with Pakistan over India. The reality, however, is far more complex. The U.S. is often engaging for tactical reasons, not ideological loyalty, but that distinction is rarely made clear in mainstream narratives. Ultimately, media manipulation, both intentional and incidental, shapes the way populations understand international affairs. By selectively emphasizing certain events, downplaying others, and spinning stories to fit a preferred narrative, the media creates a version of reality that serves specific interests. This constructed reality, when repeated and reinforced, becomes the lens through which people view diplomacy, alliances, and global power dynamics. India's role in shaping its own global image is a critical factor in how it is perceived and treated on the world stage. Perception is not only created by external forces, it is also heavily influenced by a nation's own actions, communications, and consistency in foreign policy. As India rises economically, militarily, and diplomatically, the way it presents itself and how effectively it manages its global narrative directly impacts the nature of its relationships, including with powers like the United States. India has long projected itself as a nation with a unique civilizational heritage, democratic values, and a commitment to non-alignment. However, in today's multipolar world, non-alignment has evolved into strategic autonomy. This means India often chooses not to side clearly with any one power bloc, instead prioritizing its national interest above alliances. While this approach gives India flexibility and sovereignty, it also creates ambiguity in its global image. For countries like the U.S., this ambiguity can sometimes be frustrating. A nation that doesn't always toe the line or follow expectations may not receive overt diplomatic support, especially when it chooses to go against the grain on issues such as trade, climate agreements, or global conflicts. At the same time, India has made significant strides in establishing itself as a responsible global power. It is a key player in multilateral organizations like BRICS, the Quad, and the G20. Its contributions to global health, technology, and peacekeeping efforts have been notable. Yet the narrative around India often remains limited in Western media and diplomatic circles. Part of the reason lies in communication gaps. India's strategic decisions are often explained through internal political language or historical references that do not always resonate with international audiences. The failure to consistently and clearly articulate its global stance leaves space for misinterpretation or misrepresentation. Soft power is another area where India has potential but often underutilizes its assets. Indian culture, cinema, spirituality, and diaspora influence are significant globally. However, these cultural elements are not always aligned with strategic messaging. Nations like China and the U.S. invest heavily in shaping their image through education, media, and international outreach. India's efforts, while present, are fragmented and reactive. Without a cohesive strategy for global perception management, it becomes difficult to counter narratives that portray India as combative or overly nationalistic, especially during times of regional conflict or domestic unrest. Moreover, India's internal politics sometimes spill into its international image. Issues such as religious tensions, censorship, or political polarization are often amplified in global media and used by adversaries to question India's democratic credentials. While every nation faces internal challenges, India's responses are closely watched, and any perceived deviation from liberal democratic norms can damage its image among Western policymakers. In contrast, countries like Pakistan, despite facing far more severe internal problems, often succeed in presenting themselves as victims or strategic necessities, gaining sympathy or leverage in diplomatic circles. India also faces the challenge of countering coordinated disinformation campaigns. Whether from rival states or ideological groups, there are concerted efforts to undermine India's global reputation through social media, international think tanks, and academic forums. Combating these narratives requires not only defensive measures but also proactive storytelling, something India is still developing in a systematic way. Public diplomacy is another tool India must harness more effectively. Engaging foreign youth, academics, civil society, and diaspora communities with a unified voice can significantly shape long-term perceptions. Currently, much of India's international engagement is focused at the government-to-government level, which leaves a gap in people-to-people influence. By broadening this base and investing in narrative building across sectors, India can take greater control over how it is seen and understood by the world. The responsibility of shaping one's image cannot be outsourced or left to chance. In a world driven by narratives and perception, the countries that master their messaging often gain disproportionate influence. The power of conscious citizenship in shifting paradigms is often underestimated in discussions of international relations and geopolitical influence. While governments, military institutions, and corporations appear to hold the reins of power, it is the awareness, engagement, and pressure from informed citizens that can realign national priorities and influence foreign policy decisions. In democratic systems especially, where public opinion can shape leadership and legislation, The role of a conscious and critically thinking population becomes pivotal. In the context of India, public sentiment often reacts strongly to perceived slights or injustices in global affairs, such as the impression that the United States favors Pakistan. However, emotional reactions alone do not change policies. What brings change is sustained civic engagement, informed dialogue, and a strategic understanding of how global systems function. Conscious citizens look beyond headlines and examine the structures of power that influence decision. They recognize that diplomacy is not always a reflection of moral judgment, but a calculation of interests, leverage, and long-term positioning. Awareness begins with education. A population that is well-versed in history, international relations, and media literacy is far less likely to be manipulated by partial narratives or propaganda. In India, fostering a culture of critical inquiry and global awareness among youth and voters can significantly alter how the country responds to international developments. When citizens understand the strategic reasons behind foreign engagements, they are better positioned to demand accountability from their own leaders in shaping more assertive and clear foreign policies. The media plays a key role in this dynamic, but it must be consumed with discernment. Conscious citizenship involves questioning narratives, seeking multiple sources of information, and recognizing bias. This doesn't mean rejecting all mainstream reporting, but rather approaching it with a healthy skepticism and a hunger for context. It also involves supporting independent journalism, research institutions, and platforms that provide nuanced and balanced perspectives. A citizenry that supports truth-seeking institutions strengthens democratic resilience and guards against manipulation. In democratic countries like India, civic engagement extends beyond elections. It includes participating in public discourse, organizing peaceful demonstrations, writing to elected officials, engaging in policy debates, and using digital platforms to advocate for national interest. When citizens become active participants in their democracy rather than passive observers, they help shape the narrative that represents them on the international stage. This internal strength often translates into greater global respect and more leverage in foreign dealings. Diaspora communities also play a powerful role in this process. Indian origin populations across the world have access to platforms, institutions, and governments that can be influenced through organized advocacy and cultural engagement. Conscious citizenship does not end at national borders. It extends globally through interconnected communities who can lobby, educate, and counter misinformation where it matters most. When the diaspora presents a united, articulate, and informed voice, it becomes difficult for foreign powers to ignore or mischaracterize India's stance on critical issues. There is also a spiritual and philosophical dimension to conscious citizenship. It is about aligning national pride with responsibility, combining patriotism with empathy, and transforming frustration into constructive action. It moves people from reactive outrage to proactive leadership. Instead of waiting for governments to defend national honor, conscious citizens take initiative in building bridges, correcting narratives, and advocating for justice through legal, diplomatic, and cultural means. Ultimately, the paradigm begins to shift when enough people move from emotional reactions to strategic thinking. When citizens understand the mechanics of international politics, they can hold both domestic and foreign powers accountable. They can challenge policies that undermine sovereignty, expose double standards, and support leaders who prioritize national dignity without resorting to aggression or appeasement. It is through this collective awakening that the balance of power can truly be influenced, not just by the actions of the state, but by the voice of the people.